Welcome to episode 292 of Sports Geek. On this week's episode, I chat with Cricket Australia's head of Big Bash Leagues, Alistair Dobson, about his career in sports and taking the Big Bash League to new heights.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host, who can help your team drive more revenue from Digital Team, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan. You can find me on the internet on most places at Sean Callanan, on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook at Sean Callanan Speaks is where you can find me on Facebook. As always, you can find me at sportsgeekhq.com. That's where the podcast lives. That's where Sports Geek News, the newsletter, lives. That's where you can register for Sports Biz Zoom calls. Sportsgeekhq.com is the place to find it. And absolutely, I can help your team drive more revenue from digital. And isn't it more important in 2020 and going into 2021? So if you're looking to extract as much revenue and resources out of the resources that you do have, please give me a call. We can talk about digital to dollars, how that can work with your team. We can help you develop new content ideas, help you develop content to pitch to sponsors. We can help your commercial team with the pitch. We can host sponsor workshops, either in real life as restrictions start to ease, or via Zoom. We can help you with your membership campaigns. How are you going to communicate with your season ticket holders and get them into stadiums? We can do data campaigns or branded content efforts. We can try to tackle new verticals to attract new fans. So please get in touch. Simply go to sportsgeekhq.com. Click one of the buttons, click one of the calls to action, or send me an email, sean@sportsgeekhq.com. And also, give my esports team a follow. Check out @Gravitas on Twitter. They performed quite well in First Strike, pushing the eventual finalists to map 3 in order. And yeah, really pleased with the way that the Gravitas guys played, being in our second title in Valorant, and looking forward to a few announcements on what Gravitas will look like in 2021. Before I get into my chat with Alistair Dobson, just a quick plug for the Sports Biz Zoom calls. Please, if you have not RSVP'd, they are happening this week, should this podcast go out on time. Hopefully they've not already happened, but if you've missed them, guess what? You can watch the replay. This week we're going to be talking about developing new revenue in sports. If you haven't RSVP'd, please do so. I need about 30 or 40 people to RSVP because we get about 75% people turning up. And so if we can get 20 to 30 people on those calls, it's definitely worth my time, and it's definitely worth your time. So if you're umming and ahhing about coming to the Sports Biz Zoom calls, please lock it into your calendar. I want to keep doing them. I find them valuable for myself, but I also think there's value in it for you. And if you do miss them, you can watch them in replay if you are a Patreon subscriber. You can be a Patreon subscriber and support all things that we do in the sports business content space, whether it be this podcast, our Sports Geek News newsletter, the Zoom calls. You can go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. And remember, you can do so with an annual Patreon subscriber, and you get a 10% discount. And thank you to Alan Burrows, one of the alumni who was on last week's episode, signed up as a Patreon subscriber. So I really do appreciate that, Alan. You can do so personally like Alan did. You can do so as a startup or as a business to get your name and your business out there. You can find all the supporters in the show notes for this episode. Now, what I want to do is get into my chat with Alistair Dobson. He's the head of the Big Bash Leagues. Hope you enjoy this chat. The Big Bash kicks off in a couple of days' time, so I thought it was a good time to catch up with Alistair Dobson. Very happy to welcome Alistair Dobson. He is the head of Big Bash Leagues here in Australia. Alistair, welcome to the podcast.
G'day, Sean. Great to be on.
Very 2020, having a conversation with you currently in a hub with the WBBL underway. So ticking that off my list of things to do, to be interviewing someone in a hotel room that is running a competition. But before we talk about the season that is upon us, both currently and the BBL about to kick off, I wanted to, I guess, get a bit of your background story. We met 10, 11 years ago now when you were all at the AFL. But before that, how did you get your, I guess, intro into the world of sport?
Yeah, I think born and raised country Victoria, so sport's always been front and centre in my life, as it is for most kids in country Victoria. And probably AFL footy was the thing that I was sort of most passionate about, and managed to craft a uni kind of experience around footy and some an honours degree in marketing in and around AFL footy, and that led me to a job at the Melbourne Footy Club. So started at the bottom, licking envelopes and answering phones, and worked my way up through sort of membership and events and some commercial stuff, and ended up over at the AFL for about 14 years. And
so initially getting in that space of clubland, as it's known in this part of the world with Melbourne, and then getting into the roles at AFL across multiple pieces. The one that I sort of wanted to focus on is when I met you. You were fan development manager from 2009 to 2015. That was a really, a different time from what fan development meant then and what people know it as now. What was that initial role of fan development manager? What was that remit like, back in 2009?
Yeah, I guess looking back now, it was a pretty fascinating time to be involved in. I think, the sports industry broadly was evolving from sort of a view of fan engagement being selling tickets and memberships or season tickets, and sort of getting a much broader view of what that's not quite enough to engage fans. And that leads to obviously digital and social media was just starting to take off at the time. What you do in the stadium, not just selling tickets, but the show you put on around it, the way you communicate more effectively with fans and how you get players to engage more with their fans. So sort of looking back, it was actually a pretty fascinating time when as obviously the AFL industry that I was in, but more broadly, that view that a fan isn't just a ticket purchaser, which I think historically that's what they'd been treated. So to be able to be involved in that and work with clubs who are all learning, and that's when I met you, and we were just making stuff up as we go, right, at the time.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
This sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, that early days of digital of, hey, how do we use these new platforms? But then also in that space, there was sort of effectively the birth of AFL Media and sports teams becoming fully fledged media companies, and throw into the mix, a couple of expansion clubs. So it was a very, it would have been a very wide remit to go, how do we develop fans in these territories? How do we help them connect with the existing clubs? Is that how that role evolved over those 6 years?
Yeah, I guess it was a combination of how do you build fan bases from scratch in relatively uncharted territories, and then at the same time helping established clubs like AFL clubs in Victoria understand that the days of just putting on a game isn't enough anymore, and that fans had other options and growing competition outside even just the sports industry. So yeah, it was trying to turn around or help evolve established sort of programs, and at the same time start some up as startups. As you said, it was and at the same time all these new platforms floating in, and you're trying to guess which one to go with, and is this actually going to last? Which one are you going to buy into and invest time and money in, or is it just a fad? All of that was fascinating.
And so after your fan development role, you became head of programs and market development. What did that mean? Like I spoke to, Birchie around, developing new fans previously on the podcast. What does it mean when someone sees the title like head of programs and market development? What does that mean for an organisation like the AFL?
Yeah, I guess that was a sort of a change of direction slightly into more the community and more focused on kids specifically. So broader than just AFL fans, I spent probably 3 or 4 years almost entirely focused on growing the kids segment, I guess, for the AFL and working closely with clubs. And that was a combination of, we did a bit of a turnaround on the Auskick program and sort of modernised that to a fair degree, school footy and those traditional pathway kind of programs, and helping them become more than just learning to kick and handball, but how do they become that real connection point? And at the same time, starting to build a really good view of what are other ways to connect with kids, YouTube, obviously digital content, really fun events. We started introducing big, large-scale kid zones at AFL games and all those sort of things. So probably spent a fair bit of time really getting deep in and immersed in that kids space, which, again, was fascinating to understand how a sport is so such a great engagement tool for kids. And if you can just wrap the right sort of fun and colour and movement around that, that they're all in.
The sports industry in Australia is very much everyone looking at what everyone else is doing. I mean, in that role of engaging kids and building our programs, you would have been looking at where you're currently working at, what the Big Bash had done in engaging families and bringing in kids and training that product. Was a little bit of looking over the fence or looking at summer and going, oh, what are the Big Bash doing? How can we, I guess, leverage and push into that space? Was it a bit of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as much not just around the sporting event itself, but all the things you wrap around it. So the in-stadium experience, the journey to the stadium, the colour and movement and noise, and you're always trying to, in a more traditional sport like AFL footy, you're always treading that fine line between how loud the music is and what you're playing and the content in the stadium, and trying to connect with new audiences and kids in particular, and at the same time, not completely disenfranchise the traditionalists. And I think that, looking at the BBL, just in some ways envious of that traditional element doesn't exist, and you can just go all out on the fun stuff. So it was always interesting to see what, if you were starting from scratch like the BBL did, what you would do.
And so 2019, you've come across as the head of the Big Bash leagues. Being BBL being the men's and the WBBL being the women's, heading into season 10 with the BBL and heading into in the process of completing season 6 for the WBBL. What was your remit? Because Big Bash had a platform, and exploded on the scene, a new sports entertainment product, and a really, one of the first in this market at least of really being that sports entertainment product almost equally, coming on that platform of 10 years as opposed to being in a sport that had a 100-year history and established clubs and those kind of things. There's a strong foundation there for the Big Bash. So what was your, first day, get your feet under the desk? What were you looking at?
Yeah, I think it was primarily around, or it is primarily around a competition that's now, or a league that's now 10 years old. And what's the evolution of that league from being a pure raw startup where no one knew how it was going to go, and things went unbelievably well and are going unbelievably well, but evolving into a 10-year-old league, which comes with, now you've got to the generational fans to a degree. You've probably got starting to get to the point we're going to have kids growing up barracking for the Melbourne Stars because their dad or mum did, which is a unique kind of evolution of a competition. And then at the same time, trying to maintain sort of the what's at the heart of the BBL, which is that fun family entertainment, component. So evolving into an established 100-year league for the future, as opposed to a startup that, everyone's holding their breath a little bit. So that's been the main kind of mandate. And I think that comes with the outward facing stuff like innovation within the competition, but also things like the governance models and the funding models and all the stuff that your listeners, being sports professionals and enthusiasts, would understand that ultimately that's at the core of the success of the competition is all those foundational pillars that sit underneath it. They're now 10 years old, and they've served us well, and looking closely at those.
It's a lot like when you enter your teenage years. There's a lot of growing and growth that are going to take place, and I guess that's what's ahead. So, last year being your first year, what was your? I guess there's this drive. You take to take the wheel of a new thing. You're like, what do I do? How much were you trying to shape and move things, or how much was it a bit of I want to assess, see things where they are, and not create too much change coming in?
I don't think you can ever assume or plan to do too much in your first year. It was definitely, looking at it, looking under the hood, getting really close to it. There's obviously, like any sport, an enormous stakeholder kind of landscape to get your head around, and then understand and start to form a view as quickly as you can where you think this thing can go. And so that was year one, and we had last year was about bushfires and smoke and some of the challenges that we faced last year. And in hindsight, they were a walk in the park compared to this year. But that was last year, and really trying to understand what the next 10 years should look like.
Yeah, I mean, it is something I was reading Jeff Bezos talking about making decisions, and he's making decisions for 3 years, as much as we're in this mode 2020 of making decisions for next week. How do you measure that, especially in the current environment? And we'll talk about what the challenges of 2020. How do you have that long-term view when, that you're in that mode of adapting and adjusting to what's currently happening?
Oh, it's really hard. I think you're literally day to day in the current landscape, and you've got, especially after last season, we had starting to develop some pretty bold and exciting plans, and they're partly on hold just because this year it's about executing and just operational considerations. So it is a challenge to keep an eye on the longer term future. For me, it's probably a 3 to 5 year vision, and trying to, in some ways, crises like we're going through now, if that's the word to use, help you actually uncover where some of the cracks and opportunities are, because you're sort of removing the veneer of things, and these sort of issues and challenges help you really understand where the strengths and challenges are. So that's, in some ways, it's helped to really give clarity on what we need to do. And just at this stage, it's operational, and let's get it done.
So, that COVID is obviously a big part of the sports landscape right now. And it hit here in the Australian summer. Fortunately, after the T20 World Final, it's still, the highest attended event for 2020. Yep. It was the only, it's the last event I attended, and probably yourself attended in Melbourne. Yep. To get that many people to the MCG was a terrific event and well supported. And then obviously being in your off season, knowing, everyone in sport knowing there's no off season, but at least no games. What has been some of the challenges over the past 6 months in, making plans, putting together schedules, understanding, how you're going to run, and I guess running all those different models. How is it going to? You're going to have hubs, not hubs, all the different protocols that get added. What's been the last 6 months like, when normally you would just be booking in venues and planning your schedule, but COVID brings in just a few different wrinkles.
Yeah, it's been. I guess it's been a number of cycles over the past 6 months. Part of while it's been great relatively that it's been our off season, also the length of time before the next season starts just creates so many opportunities for things to change. So as soon as you've got a plan in place, we've probably had 3 different sort of almost plans for the season, and every time you sort of establish one, obviously when things were looking a bit more rosy in June, July, we had a plan, we were ready to go, and we released a schedule, and then obviously things sort of progressed in the other direction, and so you're back starting again, and so we had almost like a more drastic plan in place. And now, as we get closer to the season, things are opening up again. So really it's been about multiple waves of planning, I reckon, which has been challenging. I think it shows you what you can do in a short period of time if you have to. You always think you don't have enough time with 6 months, and we've managed to sort of plan and re-execute a schedule in about 6 weeks, which we would never have thought we could do previously. So, I guess the past 6 months have been, I'd probably break it down into 3 lots of, 2 months, if you like, as opposed to sort of 6 months in total, just because we've had multiple cracks at it, and probably got another 1 or 2 to go, to be honest.
Yeah, I did note in that you released the Big Bash League's schedule in 2 parts, the first half and then the second half, and normally it's just a little sentence at the bottom of all draws and all schedules. The fixture is subject to change. Never is, it's almost, it should be the theme of 2020 that it will be. But before we get into the Big Bash, the WBBL has got itself, there is a little bit of how do you get your season away? How do you make sure games get played? How do you make sure your broadcasters get content? You've been able to do that in a hub 5-week competition. How has that gone? And what's been the feedback on the WBBL this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly I'd say that probably not the thing that surprised me, but the thing that I was most excited about early in starting this role is just how amazing that competition is. It's not that you ever take it for granted, but I think, and you could probably prove it's probably the best women's sports league in the world, just about in any sport of any in terms of the best players playing in the one competition, with that level of broadcast coverage and interest. So cricket should be rightly proud of the WBBL, and I know it is. And so we were, the whole industry was 100% committed to delivering the season this year, and first cab off the rank in some ways, with an October-November season. Obviously, we were planning that right in the darkest period of sort of, particularly in Victoria, and other states. So we went in thinking we had to, with a plan that we had to lock this down really tightly, but at the same time, understanding that if things got better, we needed to be able to be flexible. So a 6-week competition, all based in Sydney. We've built an athletes village, if you like, at Olympic Park, which has been we had unbelievable feedback. I think to be able to establish something, I'm there at the moment, ready for the finals, and but at the same time, I think we've learnt that putting that many athletes together for 6 weeks creates its challenges. Athletes, like anyone, just need their own space and their own time to prepare and recover. And not that we assumed it would be easy, but it's had some of its challenges. But overall, it's been definitely the right move. We've got the season away. The cricket's been awesome. The audiences have been up year on year, and we're looking forward to a great finals week this week. But, and at the same time, we probably need to assume or work on the basis we might need to do this again next year. I don't think you can take anything for granted, in the current world. So plenty of learnings around how we've set up the village and how we've executed the season. But overall, I think we've done justice to what is such an amazing comp.
And it was very much a partnership with your broadcast partners, because they, like everyone, have had a very difficult year in making sure they get the content and the sport that they've paid for and the contractually to be able to get those games away, and 24 games on 7, 36 on Fox, all of it on KO, making it accessible, especially when as a Stars or a Renegade or a Scorchers, you can't go to the games in a hub environment. Was that really important to work with your partners to really in a time when there was like no content effectively with the footy seasons finishing up? It was a nice window for the WBBL to be active in.
Yeah, I mean, we were really conscious that there's going to be a lot of fans can't see live WBBL cricket this year, given it's all in Sydney. So optimising that broadcast footprint was probably our number one priority in terms of an additional 1 or 2 games on free to air on Channel 7, and then an additional 12 games on top of that on Fox Cricket, and then all those games on KO. So our broadcast, our 2 broadcast partners are unbelievable supporters of the WBBL, and in fact, it's not. They actually truly believe in the content, in the sense that players are accessible, fun. They give so much of themselves, on the field, on the mic, in and around the game, and fans love it. They love how much fun they can see the players having, and how much it means to them. So, our broadcasters have really bought in. It ended up being a nice window straight off the back of AFL and NRL grand final, which gave us that sort of 5 or 6 weeks of, apart from some horse racing, pretty free air, which was the large part of the strategy of separating the WBBL out into a standalone season, which this is the second. So previously to be kind of piggybacking on the BBL on the men's comp. So separating it into standalone season has paid off the last couple of years with increased sort of specific or dedicated media coverage, owning a period of the year. It's been terrific.
And the Big Bash League kicking off in December 10. It's effectively like a rolling travelling circus. Partly, I'm assuming, partly around venues and state and border restrictions and negotiations you've had to do with different premiers in different states. But that would have been a logistical nightmare. But to start in Tasmania and Canberra, then move to Brisbane, Gold Coast, Adelaide, and get some games over in WA is really important. And then, a massive finish with Melbourne and Sydney taking a bulk of it really provides a really good narrative for the Big Bash for the season ahead. It was, in hindsight, you say, oh, that's the way we planned it, or was it a bit of both of logistically and trying to get as many games to as many people as possible? Yeah.
I guess when we mapped it out, we were hoping to be able to, right back when we started this wave of scheduling probably about 6 or 8 weeks ago, get to every market. We just knew, especially some markets like probably Tassie and WA that haven't had a lot of cricket there this year for obvious logistical reasons. So to be able to move across the country and in and out of each market is important, but we've done it in a way that is, I guess, as you said, in almost mini hubs, if you like, where we take sort of a week, 10 days, 2 weeks of games in a market and sort of roll that across the country. The real key's been trying to do it in a way where you're sort of moving where there are open borders at the time. So starting in Tassie, Canberra, who are probably the two most accessible markets in and out, gave us options that if we can get into Tassie and get into Canberra, we can then pretty much go anywhere from there, and you sort of roll across the country and end up in what has been until recently the hardest markets to get in and out of, being Sydney and Melbourne.
Yep.
And so the plan to finish there, knowing that if all else fails, we don't have to go anywhere after that. Now, clearly things change, and you got a slightly different scenario in Adelaide, and Melbourne's now, as probably as good as any, but you got to roll with the scenarios or the situation at the time. But we really like the flow. I think you're right that the narrative of sort of almost rolling hubs, as opposed to what some of the winter codes had to be a bit more sort of bulk execution, if you like.
Yeah.
To be able to roll, across the country in a way where you're trying to track along border lines, if you like, we think gives us the best shot. That said, there's risk in it if a border shuts, or we have another Adelaide example. But that said, we've got contingency plans, and we sort of know all 56 games. We kind of know where they can be moved to if they have to, and that's part of the key, is knowing if we meet a couple of times a week and role play different crises. If this happens, what do we do? If that happens, what do we do? And clearly our broadcasters play a big role in that, as do our clubs. So sort of a bit of holding your breath as you go into it, hoping that things can be executed the way we've planned, and going to have to think on our feet a bit at the same time.
And has there been a little bit of calling up a few friends in the AFL that have gone through this? Effectively, they've had the experience, and the NRL similarly, of sometimes hubbing, making the call early, the AFL pretty much telling all the Victorian teams to get out of even postcodes that were getting locked down, so they were flying out, like they were really early and getting in front of that. Have you had a few conversations with a few of your former colleagues to say what were some of the key points, and what made you move and made those jumps as quickly as you did?
Yeah, we've had. And they've been unbelievable, sort of, and open around sharing the good, bad, and ugly in terms of how they're able to execute the season. Primarily for us, it's been understanding how you build a hub. Now, that it sounds simple, but how you create a biosecure environment with athletes and families, and and how you set that up, and the rules and the protocols and the things you put around that. Because I think that's at the sort of they're the critical things this year, of being able to set that up. So we spent a lot of time getting input, and obviously I think the AFL did a phenomenal job of being able to do that. So yeah, they've been really open. I think the example in Adelaide last week was a really obviously unfortunate for people in Adelaide, but a good almost road test for us. We were able to pick up, I think, 15 or 16 Adelaide-based BBL and Australian players and get them to Coffs Harbour within about 12 hours.
Yep.
So that's it was a good road test for our ability to move quickly and make decisions and execute logistics. So all of those things were at the core of the AFL, and I assume the NRL's success as well, to be able to just make a decision, act, and back yourself. So learned a lot watching and listening to them as well.
Yeah, definitely, like hearing stories from the storm moving up and being on one side of the border, and then being on the other side of the border with borders being locked down. There's a lot of things there. So we've covered our obligatory 10 minutes on COVID. I want to actually look at some of 2020 and some of the innovations and rule changes and some of the motivations behind them. Like, where does things that there's some of the changes coming in, the power surge, the bash boost, the X factor, what are some of the reasoning behind them, and like, how do those decisions get made? What is the thinking behind those kind of decisions?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is the BBL is innovation at its core. The willingness and commitment to take a risk and try something different was at the heart of setting the BBL up in the first place. And I think this is about continuing to evolve the competition, and pretty unashamedly as an entertainment product. At its core, still a really elite level, world-class cricket league. Yep. But at the same time, it's been built on that entertainment proposition and had success in doing so. Unlike, or different to some other, T20 comps around the world that are probably targeting different things. For the BBL, it's entertainment, kids, families, new audiences coming in, and that hasn't changed. So I guess for us, it's, the review every year, and you talk about what the data's showing and what the fans are looking for. And really, I guess probably three things sort of emerged, back in sort of February, March, when we started down this path, was around the uncertainty of outcome. And I think, your listeners would understand that whether that's fans, commercial, otherwise, needing to stay till the very last ball or the very last minute to see what's going to happen is fundamental to any league. So just how do we create how do we inject more of an opportunity for those games to go down to the wire? I think, secondly, I think everyone loves a bit of strategy, and I think how do we get the coaches more involved, bring a bit more strategic thinking or strategy into the game, and the ability for coaches and captains to influence the game, and ultimately, continue to inject sort of other moments of interest and entertainment in the game. So that are our objectives. You then obviously we probably had 15 or 20 ideas to start with coming in from all over the place, and you kind of whittle those down to a few ideas that you think are really not only meeting your objectives, but also being true to the competition or the sport itself. So, we had some ideas that presented where it doesn't really look like cricket, or it's fundamental to the batter versus bowler kind of equation, if you like. So we kind of shelved those, and might revisit them in the future, but we shelved those for now. And then it's a consultation process, captains, coaches, broadcasters, and ultimately cricket has a sort of a playing conditions committee or advisory group that has to tick off on and does all the checks and balances on with match officials and the Players Association and others that sort of ratify or knock back. We had some that were knocked back as well. And it goes through that process and out the other end. And it's been fascinating to see. The response, and love the debate. Didn't expect everyone to be fans, and they never are. I don't think there's ever been a rule change introduced in any sport that's been anything other than hotly debated. So I think that's part of what we're trying to achieve is that conversation and bit of controversy, and it's all good, I think.
Well, that's the thing. If people aren't annoyed and fired up, then they don't care enough. And so, if they're yelling at people about certain changes, that means they care. The bit that I thought that was interesting to me was the bash boost of the ability to have that extra point up for grabs, which when it keeps the season alive, it provides more balance and more talk around the ladder. Whereas the other ones are more like in game, like, hey, how do we tweak the game? But like the longer narrative of where's the season, how you're positioning for finals. Like a team that is challenging can change their tactics to one, go and get more points, even if they're not in a winning position and those kind of things.
I think for us it also adds just another run chase. I mean, there's the best part of a BBL game is that last 5 balls or the last 3 balls where you need a certain score, and while it's one of the 4 points available at the 10 over mark of the second innings, you've got a run chase on your hands. And I think if in a normal game that's exciting, in a game that might be going be a bit one-sided, it adds something else and another point of interest for at least there's a, competitive 10 over chase in there. So really excited about that one.
Well, look forward to the season ahead. I look forward to be able to go to one of my favourite grounds in the world, the MCG, and actually see a game. It has been a while. I want to finish up with the Sports Geek closing 5. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Well, as I said, growing up in the country, probably just country footy. Now, I don't know if you'd class that as an event, Sean, given how many big events you've been to. But
I remember going to Eden Hope versus Apsley match up near Horsham. But let's stick with a semi-pro event. If you remember one of the first ones you went to.
I don't have necessarily a specific memory, but I just remember travelling to Melbourne, going to the MCG. You sort of walk up the steps. You see the grass for the first time at an AFL game, and we'd always come to 1 or 2 ODIs in a year as well. So not a specific event, but the thing that always sticks out is that moment you first see the grass when you sort of walk up the steps, and there it is. And you might get there 2 or 3 times a year, and it, growing up, it never ceased to be that moment of awe where you think this is pretty cool.
Yes. I think mine was my first one would have been at Vic Park to go see Collingwood. I think my brother was playing in the Little League, but as a young fella, it's quite an intimidating experience if people ever went to Vic Park way back in the day. But I was at least a Collingwood fan, so at least I was amongst my people. The last you have been to a lot of sports events, and the food game at sports events has definitely upped its game since those times. Do you have a favourite food memory or a go-to food when you're at a match of some sort?
Oh, I don't think you can beat the pie, Sean. I think you're a bit of a traditionalist in that sense, and good, bad, or otherwise. I spent a bit of time earlier in my career working, in country footy and travelling around different country footy matches. And you always want to test the local fare. So, I'll stick with that.
Definitely. What's the first app you open in the morning?
Yeah, again, I'm sounding like a bit boring here. I'm a Twitter guy, Sean. It's you go to for news, bit of entertainment. I feel like I've sort of got on early. I'm not a huge poster or tweeter, but I'm definitely a
consumer
voyeur and consumer. Correct?
Yeah.
So
That's still the case. A lot of people on Twitter are just there consuming content, which is fine. Is there someone that you either read, follow, listen to, an author or potentially a colleague that you think the Sports Geek podcast listeners should follow, and why?
Oh, look, I probably obviously all the usual kind of people that everyone follow. Actually, there's an ex-athlete in the US, Rex Chapman. I don't know if you follow Rex. He's not necessarily a sports business or a sports geek.
But he's just sharing good news, and occasionally in the 2020, that's what you need in your feed. And
he's always good value.
The growth that he's had on his platform on really just sharing good stories, both, and some of them are in the world of sports, but some of them are just, if you need a little pick me up, Rex is a good follower. I recommend it as well. Lastly, and you can answer this both personally, but then also with your Big Bash hats on, what social media platform is your MVP, and what's the one that's performing the best for Big Bash leagues?
Oh, look, I think from a BBL perspective, Facebook is still huge. We've obviously got a big global audience as a cricket league with lots of overseas players playing. So, from a Cricket Australia and a BBL perspective, Facebook still, is growing significantly. And I think we do a really good job of it in terms of bringing a bit of the colour, particularly, from a WBBL perspective, to be able to bring sort of that colour from in and around the village, and just the opportunity to that. And I know our clubs work really hard on that. I think still, again, Twitter's the MVP for me. It's just, the modifications they keep making. And, I feel like that's the place to go, and still get all the things you need there.
Oh, well, I look forward to you posting your first fleet on Twitter. It's just been launched this week. We're still not quite sure where it's going to end up. Every single platform's now got a stories function, but it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. Where is the best place for people to connect with you if they've listened to the podcast and want to say, g'day, Al, I enjoyed the podcast? What are the best platforms to connect with you?
Yeah, look, probably LinkedIn is probably, again, the easiest one. I'm probably pretty easy to find on there. Happy to chat to anyone at any time or around any thoughts, any feedback on the rules is always greatly appreciated. So that's probably the place to find me.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. We'll put the links for that in the show notes for today's podcast. Best of luck for the season ahead and the summer ahead. May all your games get away, and may more fans be in the stands than you expect right now. Like, that's all you can do in sport these days.
We'll take that, Sean.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. Good to speak to you.
Find out more about Sports Geek's Digital to Dollars process at digitaltodollars.com. We'd love your support on our Patreon campaign. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon.
Thanks again to Alistair Dobby, DOBBIE. On Twitter. Send him a tweet. Big Bash League kicks off December 10 here. 7 straight days of BBL action to kick off the league. And as we discussed, it'll be a travelling circus around Australia to get the games underway and get some fans to watch some cricket. Congratulations to the Sydney Thunder in the women's BBL, the WBBL. They won by 7 wickets to the Melbourne Stars. We recorded that just before those finals. So that's it. As far as the conversation with Alistair, please, there's more content available. As I've said in the last couple of weeks, I've kicked off a weekly video podcast on YouTube on all things gaming called Play Media, as part of the gaming growth agency that I've started with Chris Derrick to help brands understand the world of gaming and esports. You can find the links to that in the episode. You can go to weareplaymedia.com. On this week's episode, we talk about streamers, gaming streamers. What does a gaming streamer campaign look like? How streamers are like social media influencers, the metrics and marketing opportunities that there are in streamers, and there's some pieces there that sports can learn from, how they would enter the world of streaming and gaming, and also learn more about Pokemon Go, why it needs your attention as a marketer. and a few insights into handling traditional media. When you get a bad story, what you could learn from the world of sports, and how you can reshape and redirect the narrative, I suppose. So check that out at weareplaymedia.com. Until next time you listen to this, remember you can reach me at sportsgeekhq.com. There's a couple of big buttons on the site. We can chat, email me, call me. You can also check out an RSVP for the sportsgeekhq.com Zoom calls. Is how you can RSVP for the Zoom calls. And as always, if you appreciate these podcasts and you enjoy them and you would like to support the efforts and the work that gets done to create these podcasts, you can do so on Patreon. sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon is how you can support this work. Thank you very much for those people who already have done so. I'm really grateful for all of the support that I get both on social and on Patreon. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
We'd love your support on our Patreon campaign. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. Want to help drive more revenue from your digital efforts? Book a time for a call. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call.